Hi everyone. So in this video, I want to talk about something called synthetic division, which is related to polynomial division. So what I have in front of us is an example that I did in the last video with longhand polynomial division. So if you haven't had a chance to watch that video, my recommendation is to go back and watch that video first. And so in that video, what I did is I showed us how I can take this polynomial, x cubed plus x squared minus 2x minus 8, and we have a method for factoring out a linear factor like this of the form x minus 2. Right, so go back and watch that one if you haven't watched it yet. All right, so for those of us who have watched that video, what we know is that through the process of polynomial division, I was able to factor this polynomial and factor out this term x minus 2 through what was a seemingly labor-intensive process. Right? There was a lot of work going on, and what synthetic division does is it takes all of that writing and it sort of condenses it down into a smaller area. And what we need to know is how to do that. So what I'm going to do here is I create a box just like I did for the polynomial division, except it's upside down. So this box is to help me organize what's going on. And so what I have to do is I have to put my numbers for synthetic division in particular places. Right? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I come over here and I am going to take x minus 2 and I'm dividing it into x cubed plus x squared minus 2x minus 8. So let's go ahead and down below here, let's just make that explicit. So the type of problem that I would be trying to solve here is something like this. If I had this polynomial and I wanted to divide it by x minus 2. Okay, so if I wanted to do that, what it's going to do is tell me that the result of taking x cubed plus x squared minus 2x minus 8 and dividing by x minus 2, I should see that the answer that I get here is x squared plus 3x plus 4. Right, and so the process for synthetic division is all based on the coefficients. So I'm actually not going to write any x's down. I'm only going to write the numbers. Right, so the first thing I identify is what I want to divide by. And so I have x minus something here. And that something in this case is a 2. And so I take that 2 and I put it on the outside of my box, like right here, 2. Okay? The second thing that I do is I come up and I look at my first polynomial, what I'm dividing into, and I take all of these coefficients. So as I read down, I read off all my coefficients, 1, 1, negative 2, negative 8. Okay? So when you're doing this, it's important to note if there are any zeros. So if a term is missing, you'd have to replace it with a 0. Well, in this case, all of our terms are there. We have x cubed, and the next one is x squared, the next one is x to the first power, and then we have our constant term. All right, so my coefficients, 1, 1, minus 2, minus 8, I write them across the top. Okay, so the process goes something like this. What we're going to do is we're not going to do any subtractions. Everything is a multiplication or an addition. So step 1 is to take this 1 and bring it down front. Okay, so I take this 1, I bring it down front, and I put it right here. All right, so that's a 1. So the next thing that I do is I do 2 times 1. Okay, so in this spot right here, I'm going to get a 2 times 1. Right, so 2 times 1, I know what that is. That's 2. So let's go ahead and, we'll erase our 2 times 1, and we know that that's a 2. Okay, so 2. All right, so what I do is I add down this way, 1 plus 2, and the result that I get is 3. Okay, so we do this process again. I go over here, I go 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, so I put a 6 underneath the next spot. Then I add. So I go negative 2 plus 6. That gives me a positive 4. And we do it one more time. So I'll go 2 times 4 is 8. So I come over here and I get an 8. And then negative 8 plus 8. So I do this way. Negative 8 plus 8 gives me 0. And then I'm done. Okay. So what I like to do is I like to put a little box right here. And I have these numbers 1, 3, 4, and I have a 0 at the end. And the way that we interpret this is, well, I'll notice that this 1 and this 3 and this 4, I see that up here. I see a 1, a 3, and a 4. Okay, so all of this together, the way I interpret 1, 3, 4 is I look at one power less, right? So this was an x cubed, so this is going to go along with x squared. Okay, so this, as I read across, it represents x squared plus 3x plus 4. And then I have a remainder over here, and my remainder is 0. Okay, so I get a remainder of 0, and so that means this divides in quite nicely. And the answer down here to my question, this would be this equals x squared plus 3x plus 4. Okay, and so I can get the interpretation of a factoring like I did up here. Okay, so this is the process of synthetic division. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. I'm going to clean all this up, and we'll come back with another example. Hi everybody, we're back, and we have a new problem that we want to figure out here. So the computation that I want to do is I want to take x to the 4th minus 16x squared plus 5x plus 20, and I want to divide by x plus 4. Okay, so the information that I can get out of this, right? So it's a computation in itself. It will give me an answer. So I'll have some answer with, there may or may not be a remainder. And the interpretation is if I don't have a remainder, then x plus 4 can actually factor out of x to the 4th minus 16x squared plus 5x plus 20. So by doing this division, it's one step in trying to factor this polynomial that I have over here on the left. Okay, so step 1 for synthetic division is I'm going to go ahead and set up my area that I'm going to do my division in. It looks like this upside down division bar. And then what I have to do is go through and identify my different numbers in the places that I want to put them. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is look over here at x plus 4 and try to figure out what number I need to put out here. Okay, so this one is a little bit tricky because we have to remember that we're always looking at something of the form x minus, and so if it's a plus, this is really x minus negative 4. Okay, so what I have to do is I look at this and think about it as a minus, so it's x minus negative 4, and I have to put a negative 4 out here on the left-hand side. Okay, so let's go ahead and put our minus 4. Now I come up to my polynomial and I have to read off my coefficients. Okay, so I have a 1, I have a negative 16, I have a 5, and I have a 20. And the thing that you have to realize is one of my terms is missing. Okay, so really there's something hidden in here because I go from a 4 to a 2. So I go from x to the 4th down to x squared, so my x cubed term is missing. So really what's actually in here is there's another coefficient. It's a plus 0x cubed. So we have to make sure and be careful to take care of this 0. So I really want a 1, a 0, a minus 16, a 5, and a 20. So I'm going to go ahead and write those coefficients along the top here. So this is a 1, a 0, a negative 16, a 5, and a 20. Right, so instead of doing all of the long division, what we can do is just do our multiplications and additions. So right here, I bring this down. So my 1 comes down, I get a 1. And then negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Then I add. So I add and then I get a negative 4 here. Negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. So I get a positive 16 here. When I add, negative 16 plus 16 is 0. keep going. Negative 4 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 5 is 5. And negative 4 times 5 is a negative 20. Okay, and then looks like I get a 0 down at the end here. And so what I like to do is put a little line here. And so what this tells me is, just a reminder that this is my remainder. 0 is a remainder. Okay, so 0 doesn't have to be a remainder, but I chose it to be in this case, so we can still think about this as a factoring process. I'm able to factor out x plus 4 from this polynomial here, x to the 4th minus 16x squared plus 5x plus 20. Okay, well, since I had a linear factor when I divided out this just x here, the interpretation I have to make on these numbers starts with x cubed, so it's always one less than this term here. Okay, so what this tells me is the answer to my question is x cubed minus 4x squared plus 0x plus 5. Okay, so if this was just our problem, if we were only interested in having the answer, then that's our answer right there, x cubed minus 4x squared plus 0x plus 5. Okay, but what I want to do is use this as a first step in factoring. Okay, so it would be x to the 4th minus 16x squared plus 5x plus 20. What this tells me is this is equal to x plus 4 times something. Okay, and it turns out that that something that I've been looking for is right here in front of us, and it's this right here. Okay, so this goes down in here, x cubed minus 4x squared plus 5. And so through this synthetic division, I'm able to factor. Now, I could keep going. If I want to keep trying to factor this polynomial, what I have to do is I now have something that's a little bit smaller. So I was over here at x to the 4th. I was able to factor out an x plus 4, and now I have a cubic term, and I can sort of keep going. I can try to find factors of this polynomial here. All right. Well, let's go ahead and let's see how we can check if we're right or are wrong. Well, I told us that this is a factorization. So if I'm going to check a factorization, what I can do is go ahead and quickly just multiply this back out. So if I check and I multiply these two together, I should get back to this over here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my x, and then I'm going to multiply it by each one of these terms and see what I get. So x times x cubed is x to the 4th. X times negative 4x squared is negative 4x cubed. And x times 5 is plus 5x. Okay. So next, I take my 4 and I make sure to multiply it by all of these terms right here. So 4 times x cubed, so I have a plus 4x cubed. Then I have 4 times negative 4x squared would be negative 16x squared. And then 4 times 5 is a plus 20. So notice how I group my terms here. So I put all the x to the 4s together, all the x cubes and squares and x's and 20s and constant terms, right? So now I just go ahead and add. So I get x to the 4th, negative 4x cubed plus 4x cubed, that's 0x cubed. And I get a minus 16x squared. And I get a plus 5x. And I get a plus 20. Okay, so what I notice is that this right here is the same as this down here. And so I can conclude that the work I did up above was, in fact, correct. All right, so I hope this is helpful. And so this is synthetic division, and it allows us to figure out a nice, quick way to divide out linear factors of this form, like this, x minus something. right, see you next time.